All right, this is Matthew Matt, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the Common Core Standards for Mathematics, and in particular what they say the big ideas are in third grade. So they talk about four critical areas for third grade mathematics. The first one is multiplication division. The second is area. They talk about introductory fraction concepts, and finally thinking about shapes. This video is about geometric shapes and their properties. All right, finally, the other big area is sort of geometric shapes and their properties, and I want to talk briefly about that. Geometry is an area where maybe a lot of people kind of wonder why we teach it in school. It's not always the most useful, especially say knowing the names of shapes or things like that out in the real world. So I want to highlight what it should emphasize, that it should really emphasize reasoning, relationships, and justification, because this is the foundation for what it means to do mathematics and think like a mathematician. And while every kid's not going to grow up to be a mathematician, they need to understand how mathematicians think and how that, especially since math plays such a big role in our society, so they need to understand where that kind of thinking comes from, even if that's not the career they choose. All right, so there's lots of different kinds of shapes. In third grade, the emphasis is on quadrilaterals. Quad, four, lateral, sides, four-sided shapes. Not that they shouldn't explore other shapes, but that's what's emphasized in the standards. When kids are exploring shapes, they really need to see a whole bunch of different kinds of shapes, not just your typical shapes that you might have seen or that we might see most commonly in like young children's books. And then they should do a couple different kinds of things with these shapes. So I might pick out two shapes and ask a kid what's similar about them, what's different about them. Or I might let the kid pick out two shapes and do that. Or I might give the kid a bunch of shapes and say, you know, why don't you organize these or sort these or put a bunch of shapes together that you think all go in the same group and explain why. Or I might put them into groups and then ask the kid to try to guess or figure out what I was thinking. So for example, I might put all of these 5 shapes in a group and say, you know, why did I do that? Or another kid put them in a group, what were they thinking? And something we might notice about these is that they all have what we call right angles. Looks like the corner of a piece of paper. And so the name we give for those shapes is rectangles. Rectangle is the name for a four-sided shape with 4 right angles. I might put these shapes all together in a group, these 4 shapes here, and say what's the same about these? Why are these all together? And we might notice that on each shape, all the sides are the same length. So they have 4 equal sides on each shape. And the name we have for that is a rhombus. And then finally, I might say, well, what about these 2 shapes here in the middle? What's special about them? Why did I put them together? And we might notice those have both of those things put together. They have both right angles, 4 right angles, and they have 4 equal sides. And the special name we have for that shape is a square. And you might notice that the square was part of the rectangle group. So squares are special kinds of rectangles, and that's a big idea, that a shape can be more than one thing. It's a square and it's a special version of a rectangle. And also, these squares were special versions of rhombuses. So it's both a square and a special kind of rhombus. More generally, all of these are special kinds of quadrilaterals. And there were other quadrilaterals here. These can be put into other kinds of groups, but there are also quadrilaterals that don't really fit into any groups that we have names for. And so we need opportunities to think about all these different shapes, how they're related, and how they can be interrelated in different ways. Finally, if you are doing any kind of geometry activities with your kids, you should definitely do Which One Doesn't Belong. The website is here on the screen, and I will link to it below. They'll give an image of 4 shapes, and the question is which shape doesn't belong and why. And there's no wrong answer. That's a key idea here is there's no wrong answer to this question. The goal is just to pick a shape that you think doesn't belong and explain your reasoning. And sometimes the reasoning will be very mathematical, and sometimes it'll be more everyday or about the overall look of the shape. And that's fine to just talk about different arguments for why each shape can't belong. We can always come up with some kind of reason for why each of the shapes doesn't belong, although sometimes it's harder or easier than others. But again, there's no wrong answer, and it's more just about reasoning about the shapes and talking about your thinking. So that's my quick summary of what the Common Core State Standards say for mathematics in 3rd grade. If you have questions or want to talk more, please reach out and get in touch. I'd love to talk.